Okay, so after going to File, New, you can see that Photoshop's menu is very much the same as Illustrator's. It all looks almost exactly the same. I can go to a 5x5 inch 300 ppi, pixels per inch image, and then see my options here. Let's just say I wanted to do the logo. Okay, and then my color mode, I can pick. Typically, it's going to be CMYK, RGB, grayscale. I always start out with RGB. I'm sorry, CMYK. In the background contents here, these are options as well. It's typically going to be white. Now, jumping into this interface here, um, I'm gonna actually reset this workspace. So let me just reset. Okay, so this is what you'll see when you reset Photoshop here. Library, I'm just gonna kind of close up here. Actually, I want to go to advanced. Let me just go to an advanced one. No, this is fine. I know there's no advanced option. All right, so what I'll do is go through these tools here. Let me open up. Typically, you're going to have an image already that you want to work from, a starting point. So let me go to File, Open. And here I'm going to navigate to my folder that I have all of my files at. So you'll have downloaded them. I'm going to start with this landscape image, and I'll open that up. All right, so this landscape image here is in RGB mode. So again, this is very much like Illustrator 2. You'll see the color mode that it's in right there. All right, let me hit Command K. So we also do have a Command K or a Control K, depending on if you're in a Mac or a PC. The Preferences menu is going to be the same shortcut as it is in Illustrator. You can change the theme and everything else. This is a little bit less functional than Illustrator and InDesign, this menu, but it is there. Units and increments and the rulers here are going to be probably the thing you'll more than likely be tweaking the most. So changing your rulers from inches to pixels, depending on if you're working on something for the web or print, this would be something you'd want to consider. Hold on a second here. Okay. So we can see that this is an RGB mode. Very easily in Photoshop, you can go up to Image and then Mode. And then here's where you'll be able to change it to a CMYK color mode. So I'm just going to go down to CMYK in that mode flyout menu and then change it back. So here it's in CMYK. Now what I'm going to do is hit the undo key over and over again. So undo, redo, undo, redo. You can see what's happening here is I'm going back and forth from RGB to CMYK. Now what's important about this is that you can see there's color differences happening right now on screen. So my screen is showing me as I'm doing undo and redo, Command Z or Control Z, my color changes, okay? So that's why the first thing we want to do is change to CMYK for an RGB if our end product is print. Because these color changes, if I'm working on this in RGB the whole time, and I send this to press, it's going to come out press looking like this, and I'm going to be like, oh man, that sky looks kind of gray. It doesn't look that great. So right off the bat, put it in CMYK, and then we can kind of tweak this color to achieve what the RGB version was showing you. Yes?
So you just put this, like before converting to CMYK, you just put this into your Illustrator document, would it automatically go to CMYK?
It would show up in CMYK potentially if your Illustrator document was set for CMYK. But printing from Illustrator is it's not ideal because you can't if you were to say, if you were to bring this into Illustrator, right, and it was, let's say, 1 inch by 1 inch, and your canvas was 5 by 5, and you needed this image to go up to 5 by 5, let's say, and you just sized it up in Illustrator, it would be super pixelated when you sent it to press.
Okay.
Also, the press people, let me show you something real quick. Actually, this might help explain it too. Under my channels panel here, you can see that I have a cyan channel, a magenta channel, a yellow channel, and a black channel. So if you think of, if you remember all of those little different color pixels, the cyan, magenta, yellow, black pixels that we saw in that printed piece with the loop, that kind of magnifying glass, Photoshop actually separates all of them into their own channels. So these are all the magenta pixels in this image, okay? Here we're seeing all of the yellow pixels, and that makes sense because there's a lot of yellow in green, right? And then this kind of corn down here was all the green area. So if I was to place this image into Adobe Illustrator, do you remember when we looked in the background of that placed logo in Illustrator, it was raster art, it was a big box with an X in it? Illustrator can't tell from that image what layer is magenta, what layer is black, what layer is green, etc., etc. So if you send the job to a digital press that uses toner, a lot like this press over here is a digital press, that should be able to print it just fine if it's at the right size and everything else, it's not pixelated, etc. But if you were to send it to an offset press, which is a press that actually uses big rollers, one roller for cyan, one roller for magenta, yellow, black, then they wouldn't be able to use that file. The software would see just a box with no separations, what they call the cyan, magenta, yellow, black. So yes, you can do it, but can you print on an offset press with that type of a file? No, you can't. So there's a lot of things to consider in that, but yeah, you could, when you drag this into Illustrator and it was set for CMYK in Illustrator, it would give you that preview of this kind of darker sky that we're seeing here. So, so we're in CMYK mode right now. And what I really want to do is just kind of beef up the blues, and I want to beef up the greens a little bit so we can look closer to what our original RGB image was here. I'm clicking on. So this is our history palette. So this is helpful for jumping back and forth into different steps that I've taken here. So it's this kind of 3 boxes with this little arrow that's kind of swooping up. If you click that, you can go through every step in your history and kind of click and see what kind of moves you've made, okay, as you've been building this image. And of course you can go all the way back to the original, this landscape.jpg piece. So what I'll do, and I'll show you, I'll keep this history palette open so you can see what's happening here. I'm going to go to Image, Adjustments. And so under Image and Adjustments, I can go to Selective Color. Okay, so this is an option that is pretty frequently used by myself and, well, lots of other people, I'm assuming. But under this Colors drop-down panel here, if I hit that and go under, I can see, right, I have cyan, yellow, magenta, black. I also have targets for whites and neutrals. And then I also have RGB, so blue, green, and red. So I can select pixels based on their RGB color value or their CMYK color values. Okay. So since we're in CMYK, I'm going to have the most effect using selecting a CMYK ink, and this one is cyan. Okay. So I'm picking cyan because I want to target all of the blue, and I want to make the blue bluer. Okay. So I hit cyans. I'm targeting the cyan pixels, and I'm actually boosting then the cyan pixels by dragging the slider up to about 85%. So you can barely see what that did, but if I hit this preview button on and off, you can kind of see now a preview of what's happening. So it's going from a very kind of almost dark purple to more of like a saturated blue. All right, let's say I'm happy with that. This black slider, maybe I can bring this down and see what's happening here. It doesn't look like I have any black pixels really in the cyan area, so that's not going to work. If I lift a little bit of the yellow, I'm not really seeing much of a difference either. And even if I suck out the yellow, it's not really making that big of a difference. Magenta, however, should give me some more results. So if I boost the magenta, there I'm getting a little bit, if you can see down below, it's kind of almost giving it more of a purple tone, making the blues a little bit deeper. So I'll just bring it up a little bit, like 20%, just to give a little, maybe 25%, just to give it a little hint of more blue there. So that's a pretty decent result. Let me see. If I can target some more pixels, I can go into the whites here. So under the white, I can boost a little bit more of the blue. See what's happening there is the kind of this horizon area is actually getting bluer as well. We're losing a little bit of the white, but this is kind of part of our compromise with ourselves, trying to figure out what's more important. Is it the white down at the horizon, or do we want more of that blue? So now I can turn on or off and see that that's looking good. Okay. Okay, so I'll hit OK on that. So let's go from beginning to current. It's a little bit better. Now we'll go to beginning to just the CMYK. So here's beginning, CMYK, beginning, current. CMYK and current. So here's the difference between just the straight CMYK change and then the current change. So we went a little bit more blue. You can't. So one of the things to keep in mind is that your blues can't get as vivid on print as they can on the screen, but you can manipulate the inks or the pixels on the screen to manipulate the inks on press to get as close as you possibly can. And another thing I wanted to do is actually go into image adjustments again, and then do selective color. I want to target this green a little bit. So if I select actually greens here, I can give it some more yellow, and then I can give it some more cyan. And so theoretically, this is going to beef up my green down there. See how that's kind of getting more, it's kind of a difference of fall to, summer-ish. And then give it a little more yellow, and then maybe a little less cyan. And that subtlety there can make all the difference. So there's that. Now again, you can see my selective color option here can be turned on or off just based on my history palette. I can go back every step in history until the beginning, or I can just jump back again. So if I wasn't happy with this step, or I don't even know what the heck I did in these steps and I need to start all over, I can just go here, make another move, and then all of these steps after my original will be kind of erased. So again, see, I'm kind of back to RGB and everything else. So I'll go back to where I left off here in my history palette. So real basic kind of color editing there. Is there any questions so far? All right. Let me go into image size. So this is a big important one here. So it's not very it doesn't have much of a wow factor, but from a production standpoint, it's hugely important. So what I'm going to do is go to Image and Image Size. Under the Image Size menu here, we get all kinds of information about this file. I can see its pixel dimensions here. I can see its dimensions in inches, in height, I can see its resolution right now. All right, so let me see here. Let me show you what happens when I double the size of this in inches approximately. So I have my little, I'll call it the chain, yeah, it's basically a chain link here. So the chain link really is saying whatever I change here in the width is going to be proportionate to the height. So you'll see that the height changes when I add 10 inches. Okay, so I changed my width to 10 and my height is adjusting proportionately. This is a preview window of my image at 100%. This is just kind of give me a sense of what's happening. Let me go into a more of a detailed area. Let me make this even bigger. 20. So you see how it's starting to get kind of a little bit blurry. That happens. So what I'm going to do to let's say I want to make this thing let's say 15 inches wide. Okay, so that's 100 and what is it? It's 150% increase. So the first step you want to do when you're sizing up something to a size that you want it to be to is you uncheck this resample image box. Okay, so once I uncheck that, I'm going to actually type in the width or the height, whichever one, of the final image that I want this to be. When I change this when I change this from like 5.9 to 15 like it is now, you can see that the resolution dropped from 300 to 113 pixels per inch, okay? This is what you want at this point, okay? What it's doing is basically saying that my resolution is getting lost. I'm losing quality as I increase this image, okay? So I'm going to hit OK. So you can see that there has been no change here on this image. It kind of looks static. We're still at 100%, etc. So the next step to do to make this 15 inches wide from where it was at is again go to image and then go to image size again. So I jump into this menu for a second time. Now I actually hit resample. So you hit this resample image, you leave all of your dimensions alone, but you change this resolution to 300. And so what this does is it's going to actually pack more pixels in to kind of get my image where I want it to be. So as I zoom in here, this is the image at 300%. It's probably a little overkill, but that's kind of giving us a preview. So that's really it. You would hit OK. This option here gives you different options for enlargement. Also, it gives you options for reducing the size of an image or reducing hard edges. These are the two that you'll want to use for enlargement, and the real difference between the two is it's all about compromising with yourself. Do you want more details in your image? Is your image more detailed? In this case, I would say yes, because we have a lot of these kind of blades of grass, these cornfield blades down at the bottom, a lot of detail there. Or do we want it smoother, meaning it's kind of gonna blur it a little bit? So these are for things like flesh or things like that, things that have very little detail, more rounded edges, maybe buildings and things like that in an image. So it's just kind of about, at this step, picking which one works best for the image. Seeing it in the preview here and then just kind of hitting OK. Now this is where Photoshop starts to think a little bit more. It brings the image up really big. So now we're at 100% of the size, and then it's about oops, cancel that. It's about this big on our screen. So let's say we wanted it, kind of almost a poster size. That would be how we would increase the size of an image. So the reason why what comes into play here for something like this is, again, like the football player kid image that I showed you earlier. That was shot on a kind of a worse phone. I had to bring it in and blow it up to be like the size of a banner, because we like to print banners and stuff along with posters for the team. So it had to go from a, like an 11 by 17 size image to like a 20-inch wide, however tall image. So, and that's exactly how we would boost that image size up. Any questions on that? It's pretty straightforward. It kind of takes a couple of times to get used to, but once you get it down, um, it's one of those things where you never forget it the more you practice it and everything. All right. Let's see. The next thing I wanted to do was, I think what I want to do is show you all of these panels here. So what we have on the left, we're moving to the left side here, of course, our Move tool. So the Move tool is going to move your artwork around by layer. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to have to open up my Layers palette and show you what the Layers palette looks like. Right now we have a background layer. So this is the file that you start with in the background. You'll also have a background layer when you have a blank canvas like the one we created earlier too. It's going to be the same. It's the background and it's got this lock here. Photoshop is just going to name it background. To unlock a background layer, you're just going to want to double click and a dialog box is going to come up that will allow you to rename this layer. So let me just call it something, landscape, and hit OK. So that does a couple things. A, that's going to rename this layer, but B, it's also going to get rid of this unlock piece here. And now I'll be able to take my Move tool, which is on the left, and then move this this image layer now that's independent from the background around my canvas. And so what that's going to reveal is this kind of real checkered pattern here. And I think it shows up checkered on our screen. Let me just see. Yeah, it shows up. Yeah, it shows up good. So this is the pattern that's going to show up. This represents a transparent layer. Okay. So what this is showing you is that there is nothing behind this. This is transparent. So I can actually add a layer by going to this Create a New Layer button on the bottom of my Layers palette. Click that, and you'll see a new layer show up in my palette. Is everyone good so far on that? Okay. So it's going to automatically layer at layer 1, and then if you added more, go layer 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. So what I'm going to do is actually, I'll drag something in. So I'll go to File, I'll go to Open in Photoshop. I'm going to open up another image. I'm going to take this logo and just open. All right. Again, I opened this logo file in Photoshop. Just double click this background layer to unlock it. I'm breaking the rules here and not renaming my layer, but I'm going to actually just drag it, hover over this panel for the landscape piece that we have, and then just release. And then so this logo file layer is going to be showing up here as its own layer. Okay, so in my layers palette, it just automatically created a new layer for me. I'll just do logo here. Okay, this logo is not a vector piece. It's just, this is just for demo purposes, but I want to show you that I can kind of bring this, click it, and drag it behind the landscape layer. Okay, so now I'm kind of playing with these layers here within Photoshop, like so. If I want to draw something on this first layer that I created, I'll click on layer 1, and I'll go over to this one of our selection options, and that is the rectangular tool or rectangular marquee tool. And I'm just going to click and drag. So what does this look like when I release it here? I am seeing, let's see how hard it is for you to see. Let me Zoom in. Now, can you see these little kind of dotted marching? We call them kind of like marching ants. That's what they kind of look like to me because they're kind of moving. But you can see this is the frame at which I've selected something, okay, with my rectangular marquee tool. Notice that I have the layer 1 still selected, okay? Let me fill this with a color. Now to do so, I'm going to edit, fill. Now here I can, under contents, I can fill it with white, which is my default black, or I can fill it with color with these 3 ellipses at the end. Any menu option that you see with 3 ellipses afterwards means that you are going to have the opportunity to pick another option, okay? So when I hit color with the 3 ellipses behind it, what's going to happen in this case is my color picker is going to open, and I can pick a color based on the slider, based on clicking here, so I can get the kind of the tones or the tints of the color of the hue that I pick on this slider. So let's just pick something and hit OK. All right, and then I'll hit OK again, and that will fill my box with the color. So that box is filled on layer 1, okay? That helps. So again, I can move this independently. My edges are independent of everything else. Let me reselect that box, okay? And let me turn this layer off. So here's my little icons, my eyeball icons. I can turn a layer off just to hide it temporarily. It actually hides it too from print, so it's not going to print either if it's not visible here. But at this point, I'm going to hit this landscape layer, and I'm just going to do another fill and show you. And I'll just use the same color. So now you can see my thumbnail that I have this green box over this layer too. So now this landscape layer has this image permanently fixed over it, right? I can't move this box anymore. If I wanted to move this box off of this landscape layer, because it's actually part of it, I can't. So let's just say I wanted to select it. If I was like, oh, I'm going to move this piece, right? So I'm just going to select this green box now and move it. See how it kind of cuts out this landscape layer? When I drew this this box over the landscape layer, my layers palette, it actually merged this art together. Okay, it permanently changed the art. That's something important to keep in mind, and it shows you the importance of layers. So again, my history palette is a great lifesaver where I can actually move back steps at a time. That's kind of what happens. So now I'm back to where I left off, where everything was okay. Now I'm going to start from this point in my history. So I'll turn this layer on. Turn this layer on. This green box. So now I can move this independently. So just keep in mind that the more layers, typically the better in Photoshop. So keep in mind, if I actually make a change to this layer here, this landscape layer, it's going to be pretty permanent, and I'm not going to be able to do anything about it besides go back into my history and kind of retrace my steps that way. What else? Let's see. Let me go through all these tools real quick. So we did see the rectangular marquee tool. I can just draw this. You can see I'm drawing over a layer that's hidden. Let's say I wanted to move that. I can't move it. It's hidden. I can't touch it. But if I go over here and click landscape, now I can cut and paste. I can move this piece. Okay. So the rectangular marquee tool basically just going to create rectangles for you. If I click and drag, it's going to be any kind of rectangle I want. If I hold the shift key, it's going to constrain the proportions to be a perfect square. Okay. Let's see. Next one under here, the elliptical marquee. Again, just like Illustrator, I can draw an ellipses, and that's just gonna, be whatever kind of ellipses I want. Otherwise, if I constrain it by clicking and holding the Shift key, this can be a perfect circle. And you can see I still have that logo layer beneath. I'm just going to delete it, so I'm going to click on it in my layers palette, and I'll just hit this little garbage can here, and it'll say, "Would you sure you want to delete it?" And I'll say, "Yeah." Okay. Okay. And I'll deselect. Okay. Let's see what else. Let me go back into my history some more. Redelete. Let's see. The single row marquee tool, this is just going to select a single pixel row in Photoshop for you. Hardly ever use that, so it's probably not worth going over that much. The lasso tools, however, are pretty great. This regular lasso tool, real quick to get something selected and done. So let me just show you what that looks like here. If I wanted to select a piece like that, real messy, I can just do, I didn't have that layer selected. Now I can just kind of move this piece, and you can see it's just kind of moving this piece for me. The real reason why you would want this lasso tool is if you have an image separated in another layer already. See, I can turn this landscape background layer off and on. If you have them separated already, and I want to quickly select it, I can just really quick drag this lasso willy-nilly around it, hit my move tool here, and then just click and move, and now you can see that my pixel ants or selection actually refines pixel perfect to what is on that layer. Okay, so again, this is on its own layer, separate. If I want to select something on its own layer really quick, I can just take this lasso tool and then encircle it. See how I kind of messed up my selection here, and I moved and I missed this little piece at the bottom? I can actually take my lasso tool and then zoom in here and then hold the Shift key. You see how the little plus sign happens on my tool? I can actually hold that down and then add to the selection. So see how it added my lasso to that selection? And then super important keyboard shortcut is V for the move tool. Just hit V, click, and drag, and now your pixels are more refined. Let me do something, show you a more realistic application for that. Let's say I have, let me do something like this. See how the edge here is real faded? How are you going to select that, Are you am I going to go in here and just like try and lasso every little tiny little piece? No, not really. I can take my lasso tool, I'll just encircle the entire thing really quick. Hit V, my move tool, and then start moving it. Now Photoshop is reading that edge for me. It's doing all of this work for me. So now I can move this piece independently from the background, and I don't have any little missing pieces from the back, that I need to move around. So that's in more of a practical application. That's how you would use this lasso tool and others as well. It comes in handy. Polygon lasso tool, same idea, except it's going to select based on it, very much like the pen tool, where I can actually click, drag, click, and then make a sharp edge shape like that. Sharp edge kind of selection. So make sure my landscape layer is selected, and I can move that shape around as well. That comes into handy if you have geometric shaped objects like buildings or something like that on a background that you want to really refine the selection and so on. So I'll use that every once in a while to magnetic lasso. This comes into handy as well for a variety of different reasons, but I'll show you the main reason would be to select areas of color that are very contrasted to each other. So if I'm looking at this image and I want to kind of select as much of this grass blade stuff as I can without getting too much of that background, I can maybe perhaps use this magnetic lasso tool to do that. So this tool, when you select it, allows you to set a frequency of points. So as I click and move my mouse, you can see that points are actually being dropped down as I'm tracing. And this is my selection. So it's actually tracing the differences of color. So on the one hand, I have a lot of blue pixels. On the other hand, I have a lot of green. And if I wanted to make a quick selection like this, I can just kind of drag over the separations and it'll kind of loosely trace what I want, okay? Not perfect, but it's not a tool that you want perfect tracing with. So there's kind of the finish for that. So if I wanted to get it more refined, I would increase the frequency of points that are being dropped as I'm tracing over. So let me show you what it looks like when I decrease the frequency. So I'll have my frequency of 10. You can see that it's not dropping anything as often as I'd like it to. It's dropping one every, I don't know, couple steps here. So increasing the frequency to 100 will drop more points down. So this comes in handy at times, and I'll show you a sample of that, a more realistic sample of it. If I were to want to really quickly and roughly select this green, you could almost do that. And see how I'm kind of at the edge here of my panel? I can't really move any further. If I hold the spacebar down and click, and hold and move, I'm able to move my canvas without moving my tool. So now when I release the spacebar, my hand tool goes away and I'm back to the magnetic lasso tool. So if I want to quickly just select these, and now see how it kind of roughs the bottom. Now you see how I have this edge kind of not quite right around the edge. That's fine. I'm actually going to use my marquee tool, my rectangular marquee tool. Hold the shift key. My plus sign is going to come up. This means add to my selection, so I'll just add these missed pieces to my selection. Down at the bottom here, all this roughed edge stuff. All right, and let's just say, with that I wanted to make a change, like a color change or something like that. Do like a gradient map or something. So if I wanted to do something, just to isolate this area, pretty roughed, that would be like one thing I could maybe do real quickly. You can see it's not perfect, but I can show you how to select things more perfectly. This is just sometimes like in particular, this came in handy for me if I'm like really trying to trace something very quickly that has a lot of contrast. Let's just say like these clouds, for instance. This cloud can be selected pretty easily with that. But I don't want to get too far deep on that tool. All right. Ooh, let me go back. Okay. What else do we have? The Magic Wand tool is the next one. This is pretty straightforward. I want to select pixels in the blue range. If I click with my magic wand a blue pixel on my palette, it's going to select everything within that range that's the close to the pixel that I selected. Okay. If I hold the Shift key and then I select another pixel, it's going to simply add that tonal range to that pixel that I selected. Again, I can add, and so on and so forth. So it's just adding and adding and adding to it. Sometimes that's helpful as well. If I wanted to do the greens, maybe this might be even more helpful. Now, the piece about this tool that's pretty important is this tolerance feature. The lower the tolerance, very much like the magic wand where it puts down less points, the lower the tolerance, it selects less pixels that are close to what you've selected originally. So if I then select again this blue with the tolerance of 10, it's going to select a little bit less of what I originally selected. If I drop the tolerance down to 5 and select, it selects even less and less. Okay. If I bring it up to like 100, then it's going to select a lot more. Okay. So, you know, again, I have that selected, and if I wanted to do something crazy with the color, you know, I could do that. Yeah, so Photoshop is all about just really selecting. If you can select it, then you can manipulate it and create any kind of image that you're really going for. So that's the wand tool. People typically like to use that a lot, especially let's go to this logo right here. If I wanted to select like this black pixels, for instance, this would be a quick way to do it. It's very much like the wand tool in Illustrator, except this is going to be pixel based. And in Illustrator, if I use the wand on an object, it's going to select all of the instances of the points and paths or the shapes. In this case, it would have the shapes of black all selected at once. In this case, it's just all the pixels that are all connected with the same color to be selected. Okay. So it's not selecting all the instances of black, it's just all the instances of black that are attached to the pixel that I've selected originally. For the most part, typically it would be used to get rid of like a white background, just like that. And of course you'd have to take into account, you know, these little cutouts here, but that would pretty much get the job done for you. Let me drag this over so you can see like how it's kind of knocked out of the background. Okay. Again, this is a pixel-based JPEG, just placed in there. When you export or save as a JPEG, the white is going to show up. But since we're working in a Photoshop file, right now my transparency is adhered to, so I can work with transparency in a Photoshop file. All right, and then one more quick one, I think, before we go to a break. I want to show you how we're going to work with, sorry, my brain is still in vacation mode here. Smart objects. So let me open this Illustrator file. This is kind of how we're going to bring it together a little bit. This is the Doc Martin logo Illustrator file that I had. Going from Illustrator to Photoshop, just dragging and dropping this in, here's kind of what happens. I plopped it in there, and in my layers palette, I see this option here, or this layer name, Vector Smart Object. So Smart Object is a vector-based file placed in Photoshop. Okay. What's nice about these in Photoshop is I can increase and decrease the size of this file. I just want to mention it's not officially placed in here. I have these, and you can see it, I hope, up here. But there's this X kind of over this image, very much like what we saw in Illustrator. It's just because it's not placed officially. I dragged it and dropped it in, but what I have to do to actually place it in here is hit Enter. or return. That placed the file in there, so now you can see the object's gone. I can still move, or the border is gone. I can still move this around, but now that it's in here, I can double click this icon, and it's actually going to open it up in Illustrator. Okay, so again, let me just close this down. Close Illustrator. We're starting from scratch here. Double clicking this smart object, and Illustrator fires up, and this opens up in Illustrator. Okay, so this tells me that Photoshop has linked this Illustrator vector-based file into Photoshop. So when I double click it, it's going to open in Illustrator. Now here's what's cool about that is I can make a change. So I'm going to take my wand tool and I'm just going to go over this yellow piece and select it. And I'm just going to like do a color change or something. So let me just pick a color. Something brighter. Okay. Alright, so I changed my yellows to this blue. Now I'm going to save it. So I hit, you can go to File, Save, or what I do for a shortcut is Command S or Control S to save. That's pretty much across the board. You can do that in Microsoft Word and everything else. Now, after it's saved, I jump back to Photoshop, and now you can see that the artwork actually updated, okay, in Photoshop. All right. This could come in handy for you sometimes, you know, if you are working with these things in Photoshop. The idea here is that this Illustrator file is linked and embedded into Photoshop. This is an important concept to take into account when you're working in InDesign as well. Because the same concept applies in InDesign, where InDesign works with multiple files of a different origin that, when updated in their native program, maybe Photoshop, maybe InDesign, or maybe Illustrator, when they're updating those native programs and you jump back to InDesign, those files are then updated in InDesign. So back here, remember that green was looks a little bit more washed out now than it did in Illustrator. If I jump back, I can see I'm in RGB. So see how bright that green is? I love the brightness of that green. And now it's really kind of muddy and nasty looking. So the best thing that I would do if I'm working between the two is change the color mode. So that would go over to edit. Where is it? I'm losing myself here. Right under File and Document Color Modes, CMYK. So now I can get a more realistic adaptation of the green. Go more yellow. All right.